For the chair is the bill be now read a second time, and I'll give the call to the Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. And another fine contribution from the member for Macmillan, who spoke about the effect that the robbery performed by Labor did, particularly to regional electorates. And certainly I know he represents a rural electorate, as do I, the Riverina, and this particularly affected those regional constituents. He talked about the robbing was the way that robbery was almost criminal, and indeed it was. Of all the policies enacted by Labor during those 6 sorry years from 2007 to 13, I reckon this one was just about the bottom of the barrel. We saw Labor cut defence spending, and I note the shadow parliamentary secretary for defence here, but cut defence spending to almost to 1938 levels. Oh, here we go.
Is there a point of order?
No, I was wondering if the member would take an intervention.
Happy to.
Could the member please set out for the benefit of the parliament in what year and to what scale there were defence cuts?
Give the call to the Parliamentary Secretary.
Well, I'll take the intervention because the cutting of defence spending was by Labor. Well, you've asked your question, you've asked your intervention, and I've happily accepted it. Was to the levels of 1938 as a ratio of gross domestic product under Labor. I saw projects in the Kapooka Army Base, the Army Recruit Training Centre, responsible for sending for the training of recruits and issuing of training to those brave men and women, cut. Projects for infrastructure at Kapooka cut because of Labor. But I'll go back to, and the only area that Labor wanted to spend money on was buying back water out of my irrigation communities. I mean, there was always enough money for that, but there was never enough money for defence, never enough money for health, for education, for all those important things that Labor always purports to represent but never does. But I tell you what, the bottom of the barrel was when they tried to ensure that that money was being trousered from children's accounts, from seniors' accounts. This bill ensures that bank accounts and life insurance amounts cannot be transferred to the government until they have been inactive for 7 years. The bill exempts children's accounts and accounts in a foreign currency from the provisions and better protects the privacy of account holders with unclaimed funds in order to limit the ability of some businesses to exploit them. Now, up until 2012, accounts must have been inactive for at least 7 years before they can be transferred to the Australian Securities and Investments Commission. In 2012, this period was reduced by Labor to 3 years, from 7 years to 3 years. This resulted in a large number of effectively active accounts, such things as we've heard the member for Ryan talk about, education funds, funeral accounts, all these sorts of things being transferred to ASIC and left many Australians, member for Batman, many Australians financially stressed. Shame, Labor, shame. The previous Labor government made such a mess of the budget during its time in government, it was constantly looking for more cash. But as I say, this was just robbery at its worst. In October 2012, a despairing Labor government, with the member for Lilly as its treasurer, desperate for cash, announced changes to the unclaimed monies provision, which reduced the period of inactivity required before bank accounts and unclaimed life insurance amounts are transferred to the government from 7 years to 3 years. These changes caused significant and ongoing disruptions for effective account holders and the financial services industry. This was a direct attack on people's bank accounts and a most inappropriate grab for money by Labor. I mean, I've had my house robbed, and there's nothing worse. You could imagine going online or going into the bank, your financial institution, and asking and looking up to see where your bank account was, and realising that all the money was gone. Where's it gone? It's gone to ASIC. Labor just didn't care. Labor didn't have one single care for those people who were saving for a holiday, saving for a tertiary education for their children or their grandchildren, saving to put money away so that they wouldn't burden their kids if they died. and I can give you one such example. There was the family of a 95-year-old Harvey Bay pensioner had $50,000 forfeited from a bank account because it hadn't been used for 7 years, and they were warning others to be aware of the laws put in place by Labor. Put in place by Labor, member for Batman. Craignish resident Jan Powell said she was shocked when she went to check on the status of an account her mother opened in 2002, established to pay her, the lady's funeral costs, and found the balance had gone from $49,000 to zip. $49,000 to diddly squat. Nothing. Zero. Zilch. How disgraceful. And the rigmarole that people, then had to go through to get the money back. And sure, some might say it's an easy process. Some might say it's a perfunctory job of the banks and fill out a form, but some people aren't good at filling out forms. Some people get worried and stressed about filling out these forms to get their own money back. Disgraceful. What was that? No, listen to it, will you? And he rubbishes the National Party, but that's why the Nationals are in government, to fix up the mess left by his mob. To fix up the mob left. We're in government with the Liberal Party. Don't worry about that. We're in government with the Liberal Party, and you're sitting on the opposition benches, and for good reason. And for good reason. And it's because of policies such as this very one that we're debating tonight is why you are on the opposition benches and why you ought to stay on the opposition benches. Now, up until 2012, accounts had to remain inactive for at least 7 years before funds could be transferred to ASIC. The previous Labor government reduced this, as I say, to 3 years, resulting in a large number of active accounts being emptied and leaving many Australians financially out of pocket. This change resulted in about $550 million, almost $500 million, more than $500 million, pardon me, transferred from 156,000 Australian accounts to government coffers in the 2012-13 financial year. I'll just repeat that. More than $500 million from 156,000 Australian accounts to government, aka Labor coffers, in 2012-13, because the member for Lilly was so desperate he couldn't come up with any more ways of cutting back, paring back all the other defence spending, all the other health and education, all those other priorities. So effectively they put in this, well, it wasn't a Robin Hood, but I tell you what, it was a real bushranger policy. Stealing from the, I won't say stealing, that's probably unparliamentary and I'll get pulled up for it. I'll just say taking from people's hard-earned accounts and putting it into government coffers. Before the period of inactivity was reduced by Labor from 7 to 3 years, only $70 million was transferred as unclaimed money in the previous 12 months. The Coalition at the time, and I can remember getting up here a couple of times and talking about this, said this change was completely inappropriate. It was, and would seriously inconvenience people from across Australia, particularly regional Australia, and especially the Riverina and the people from Macmillan, who for a very sensible reason put money aside in their bank accounts for a rainy day. Labor went after people's bank accounts in utter desperation. This was a clear and conscious attack on people's money. And you know, who was Financial Services Minister in the previous Labor government? Who was it, member for Hughes? Any guesses? Member for Maribyrnong. The member for Maribyrnong. That's who it was. The member for Maribyrnong, who is now the opposition leader. He was the one who was the Financial Services Minister during the time that Labor brought this unscrupulous bill before the House. The Australian people cannot trust Labor when it comes to managing money. Smart people know that. Labor's changes to the unclaimed monies provisions increased the regulatory burden after the volume of accounts being transferred dramatically increased overnight. So it's ironic that Labor went after people's money in a desperate cash splash booked as Commonwealth revenue to improve the bottom line, only to increase red tape and expenditure due to the substantial increase in regulatory burden. And that's precisely what we're getting rid of. It was started by the member for Kooyong, who is now the Assistant Treasurer for good reason, because he did such a good job, cutting red tape and regulatory burden that he was promoted, and he's doing a fine job as the Assistant Treasurer to the member for North Sydney. and thousands of accounts literally transferred and subsequently reclaimed from ASIC. Account holders then waited for up to 6 long months for their money to be returned, leaving some people and families financially distressed, and with good reason. Labor's changes to the unclaimed monies provision caused substantial disruption and financial distress for affected account holders, which is why, in opposition, the Coalition opposed Labor's changes. Upon coming to government, the Coalition released a discussion paper to consult, and there's something that Labor never did. They never talked to stakeholders, so we went out there to see how we could improve the unclaimed monies provision, and the result is this bill before the House tonight. Specifically, the Coalition sought to reform the unclaimed monies provisions, suggesting the period of inactivity of personal bank accounts should be increased, exempting a broader range of products, reducing the regulatory burden and tightening privacy concerns. These changes were also recommended as part of the Financial Systems Inquiry. Increasing the time period of account inactivity from 3 to 7 years will reduce the regulatory burden and is consistent with the government's policy commitment to slash $1 billion worth of red tape and green tape each and every year. And we're getting on with that very important job of government. The amendments proposed to reduce the regulatory burden in this legislation will generate $36 million in savings each year and reduce the fiscal balance by $158 million over the forward estimates. Notable industry stakeholders support the government's bill following public consultation and discussion processes and the release of the draft exposure of the bill. And a very good endorsement came from the National Seniors Chief Executive, Michael O'Neill, who said the 3-year limit is just ridiculous. That's what he said about Labor's policy. 3-year limit, just ridiculous. He went on to say older Australians may not touch their secondary or backup accounts for a few years. It does not mean it is unclaimed or indeed inactive, and certainly it is not necessary for government to become involved and seize the funds. And of course, Mr O'Neill is absolutely 100% correct. Now, this bill will reverse the unorthodox changes that Labor made in a desperate grab for cash when it was in government. It will ensure the personal bank accounts and life insurance amounts of all Australians cannot be touched unless it is distinctly obvious that they have been inactive for 7 years. The bank accounts of children and accounts in a foreign currency will be entirely exempt from the provisions, as they should be. The government recognises that accounts are often open and set aside for a number of years before the account holder will access them, and that's certainly the case, as we saw with the Hervey Bay pensioner. She's saving money for her funeral so that she didn't burden her children with an unnecessary cost in the order of thousands upon thousands of dollars, and left to find that money at what is a very sad and difficult time for families when they lose the matriarch of their family or lose a loved one. So she'd set aside, and of course, you know, the money got pinched, got stolen, got thieved. People make these personal decisions based on their own circumstances, as our Hervey Bay pensioner did. It is not the business of governments to interfere in the finances of individuals. It's not. It's our job to get out of the way and let people get on with the job of doing what they do best. The changes in this legislative amendment will also provide increased protections for individual account holders. Specifically, it will cease the publication of the Unclaimed Monies Gazette so that personal information of account holders is not published online, and restrict freedom of information requests in order to protect individuals' details. The government's objective has always been to reunite people with their money as swiftly as possible. Labor's was to separate people and their money as quickly as possible, and to that extent it worked. But you know, the Liberal Nationals understand, appreciate and acknowledge that people's money is their own and should be used by them for whatever purpose they intended it to, not to prop up the member for Lily's budget deficit and debt. True to our word in opposition, we said we did not support this initiative, implemented by the Labor government, which was supported by the Greens, and I've got to say, the members for New England and Lyne at the time, the independent members. Thank goodness those seats are now gone to National Party members. We made the commitment to the Australian people we would fix it, and proudly we are now delivering the legislative amendment to do just that. This is good legislation. This is necessary legislation. This is appropriate legislation, Mr Deputy Speaker, and it needs to pass this House to fix up the mess that Labor left to end the wrong that was done. Thank you.